This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And thank you all for coming. This is quite a turnout. And I'm really honored to be here to give the SMART lecture to all of you. And I'm humbled to see so many people interested in the lecture today. And I hope that I can tell you about some things that you'll be excited about seeing and how these technologies that are based on scientific discovery have already changed your life and are going to change your life in the future. And so I hope I can live up to that. So the title of the talk, hopefully, is to look at future technologies. We're going to talk about a number of things, and I'm going to delve into some of the basic science behind some of these discoveries. So the new technologies that lead to commercial products are usually found through basic scientific discoveries that are found within universities and with industry, and they're really based on exploring new theories in science, and and discoveries are made often that will seem completely useless. So somebody will measure what's called the magnetic moment of an electron. That means they took an electron and they measured that it has a kind of a magnetic field associated with it. That was done in the early 20s, I think, or no, in the 1900s. And you as a citizen, educated citizen might say, so what? And so, you know, in the scientific community, maybe 30 years later, that person won the Nobel Prize for measuring the magnetic moment of an electron. And now you experience the magnetic moment of an electron all the time, every time you go and get an MRI. So because of that discovery, MRIs were invented, and it's revolutionized the doctor looking at my shoulder from old baseball injuries and allowing them to do surgery on me. So I'm sure you've had similar experiences. So some of these things sound really esoteric, but they actually end up being very important things that are going on. So this, not very long ago, was the future, to tell you about the televisions and displays of the future. But these are televisions and displays that are here now, and they're based on scientific discoveries. So chemists like me, I'm an organic chemist, I like to make molecules that are colored. So they're like dye molecules. So if ink pens and dyes and things like that you're familiar with, your clothes are all dyed. They're molecules that contain color. And there are certain colored molecules that you're aware of that glow under a black light. And so I'm, of course, way too young to remember anything about blacklight posters or anything of that nature. But, you know, blacklight posters is a good example of that. Scientific discoveries that were based on making these colored molecules that glow under a black light, essentially, have led to the new televisions that you can't afford right now. But you will be able to afford very, very soon. So let me tell you this story about that. So a long time ago in the 1500s, there was some guy who said he saw some water from a wood in a certain tree, and he said it kind of glowed. And he thought that was pretty cool, and he had no idea what was going on. It turned out that tree, many years later, was found to contain a dye called fluorescent, which is this one that glows green. I've drawn the molecule here. And then after that, almost 100 years later, Boyle, a famous chemist, studied them. A guy named Stokes found that you can shine light on things and they glow, and he explained the concept of fluorescence, which is basically light shining on a molecule. The electrons get excited, they have too much energy, and they have to give it off, and so one of the ways they give it off is to emit light to go back to their resting state. And he termed that coin fluorescence. And this fluorescence has led to all kinds of great things for all of us, you know. Optical clothing, very important things like that, but also things like dye tracing in your heart to see if you have a blockage, and lots of really cool things like cancer diagnostics and things like that. If you look down at the bottom, you probably can't see that, but fluorescent dyes are used to see where the tumors are located in the body, and so that's an important discovery. So here's something you're very aware of. If you take a gin and tonic and shine a black light on it, you'll definitely get some glowing going on there. And then, your black light poster, one of my favorite groups, Metallica, and then lots of cool things that you wear at the rave that I'm sure all of you have been to. This is a very important discovery. So there was this guy, and there's a guy named Ching Tang. He worked at Kodak, and Ching Tang is a clever guy. He is now at University of Rochester, but he had this molecule, and this molecule was an aluminum molecule, and it had some organic molecules. Any of those little bends you see are actually carbons. And so it's mainly a carbon molecule stuck on aluminum. And he found out that if you shine a black light on it, that it glows. And he did something else that's very interesting, is he applied electricity to the molecule, and when he applied electricity to the molecule, it glowed, it lit up. And so you're familiar of this concept. It's called electroluminescence. It's in fluorescent light bulbs that you see above you. Fluorescent light bulbs have a material in there. If you apply electricity to it, the electrons get excited, and then they give off light to create the fluorescent light bulb. And so he put these in an electrode. It's just this drawing of this is just a battery, and you put some electrons in there, and it lit up. And so this was an important discovery in 1987. Then later on, there were these two guys, Mark Thompson and Steve Forrest, and they were both at Princeton. Mark was an assistant professor. He's a pretty good friend of mine. Steve Forrest, also a good friend of mine. And Steve was a physicist, and so he knows how to make devices and stuff. And Mark knows how to make molecules. And so this guy, Mark Thompson, made a bunch of molecules. These are pretty fancy-looking molecules, but they're nothing you're not that familiar with. Chlorophyll in trees, which are nice and green. Those are basically molecules called porphyrins, or related to molecules called porphyrins. And these molecules here are basically porphyrin molecules. And so that gives the leaves green color. And then when they start dying, there'll be a test on this later, the double bonds start getting oxygen put on them, and so the double bonds go away, and so it goes from this green color to orange and red and yellow and that sort of stuff. So that's stuff you're really familiar with. He made these molecules, and he found out if you apply electricity to them, you could make all kinds of different colors. This one was red, this one was sort of a pinkish color, and this one actually glowed white. And so this led to molecules like this iridium compound. Iridium is probably not something, it's a metal that you're not familiar with, and a bunch of carbon molecules on here. These are basically, this is a benzene ring. And so you get this kind of he takes this molecule and this molecule, which are the same, and this molecule, and he mixes it in with this iridium, and they all stick to the iridium to form this molecule, we'll just say, that comes out as a powder. And then you can dissolve it and make a film out of it, or you can heat it up really hot and make a vapor out of it and then deposit it as a film onto a surface. And by doing that, then you apply electricity to it, it glowed. And this was a critical discovery. And they found that you could, depending on what kind of shrubbery you stick on these things, you can get red, green, blue, yellow, whatever color you want. If you have red, green, and blue, you can make a television set, right? You all remember, the green tent button and the red tent button and the blue tent button. I had a TV in grad school. I had to hit it on the side, and the blue would kind of come in, and you hit it on the other side, and it would, because the buttons didn't really work. But that's what you were doing, is you're adjusting the filters, the color filters on your TV to get the right color. They never really worked that well. But so they knew that this was a really big discovery going forward. So again, they could make different molecules, and they could make red, green, and blue out of these molecules. And so once you have red, green, and blue, if you put a lot of red and a little bit of green and a little bit of blue, you can make one color, a lot of blue, a little bit of green. So you can change the amounts of whatever colors you put in to make any color you want. And because you have, if you make a little dot of these things and you can put electricity behind them, you can turn them on and off and make essentially a television. And so they knew that this was a pretty big discovery. They formed a company called, Universal Display Technologies. That company is worth, I don't know, $1 billion, couple, 2, 3 billion, who knows how much it's worth. UDC, go look it up on the stock exchange. That company is worth a lot of money now, and these guys did pretty well. So they made something out of this called an OLED. OLED is organometallic organic, which means organic means carbon stuff. Organometallic means carbon stuff and metals. And light-emitting diode means that it has, a diode just means it has two contacts. So when you have a light bulb, the light bulb comes in and touches in one place and it touches in a different place. It has two contacts. Or the fluorescent light bulb is a better example. You have the two little prongs, right? And each one of those is a contact. So that's a diode, means two contacts. And so they can make these light-emitting diodes out of this material. And so what you actually do is you have a conductive material, so that could be like copper or something like that, and you can deposit this material, these red, green, and blue molecules on these on glass or various things, and then you put some other stuff in here that you don't need to know much about. This is whole injection, whole transport. It allows electricity to go one way and not sort of leak the other way. And when you do that, you can make lights. And so after this discovery, they needed to do a couple of things to be able to get, this is science, this is the discovery. You go and you say, I've made this discovery and I'm going to change the world. And then you go and you take it to a company and the company says, you didn't change anything. This is a bunch of junk, You can't, it takes 19,000 volts to light it up. It dies in 3 seconds. It reacts in oxygen and water in the air. I mean, it's a disaster. What do you think? Plus, you have to heat it up and vapor deposit it on this stuff. I mean, how are we going to make roll-to-roll TVs out of that? That's ridiculous. So it took a long time from the discovery. It took 17 years to fix all of this stuff to make it commercial, to translate the science into this stuff. And so here's the timeline. So there was a Panasonic, I think, made the very first little radio with a yellow molecule in it. And then they put it in a couple of phones that you probably didn't have. And then Kodak actually put it into one of their cameras. And then you started seeing it in some different phones here. These are some phones that were available in Asia. And then eventually Sony made a small display out of this stuff in the early 2000s. And then about 2010 at the Consumer Electronics Show, LG Electronics had the first sort of prototype television that came out. And then in 2015, they had the first sort of LG television. They were first $10,000 and then $5,000. And now you can buy them at Best Buy. And so OLED television is the latest and greatest thing. It's amazing. The TVs, if you look at them, they're this thick. I mean, they're just super thin. They use almost no electricity. So the energy efficiency is amazing. And the colors are absolutely fantastic. You can go online on YouTube and take a look at this video. I won't play it today. And you can see the demonstration. So I don't work for any of these companies, but I'm just saying that this is pretty good stuff. The smaller ones are cheaper, obviously, and the bigger ones cost a lot more money, but they're really pretty amazing. So wanted to walk you through a basic scientific discovery and how that's going to change the world going forward. It already has changed at least our ability to watch the Super Bowl or whatever you prefer to watch flowers bloom or whatever they're showing there. And this is from the Consumer Electronics Show. This shows all these panels of these OLED televisions made in a 3D room at the Consumer Electronics Show. So that's quite beautiful. Well, this is not easy, though. The manufacture of OLED television is a complicated process. You have to take these molecules, you have to evaporate them, you need to heat them up in pretty hot temperatures. You have to put them under a really high vacuum, to suck all the air and water out of there. And then you have to precisely deposit them, perfectly on these big, large pieces of glass. And so this is not the easiest thing in the world. But good enough to make money on television. They got to give us a new television every once in a while, right? I mean, you can't, these LED televisions that we had before, instead of using a big light in the back, they just use LED lights. That's the big technology jump. And so we all bought into that. So they have to tell us something, some great story so they can sell us TVs for a lot of money and make big profit. So they have to have something new all the time for us to buy because because we're that way, right? And so that's the next thing will be printed television. So the next generation, here's a printer showing, in the future they're going to not evaporate, but they're basically going to take inks and they're going to print them onto glass and they're going to print you out a television. It's going to be really quite amazing. And if this would have been accomplished 10 years ago, I would not be here. I would probably be on my yacht. It was my first startup company probably would have made a lot of money, but we started a company too early, and this is not here yet, but it's coming. So to print electronics, you need an ink. You all know what an ink is. And then once you deposit it and make the dry stuff, you need it to conduct electricity. And so you need something that, you can't really do that with metals because, metal, silver, melts at 1,000 degrees. It's not soluble in anything, so you can't really print silver. Although I'll tell you at the end on how to print silver. But just keep that in mind for now. It's not really practical with semiconductors like silicon. Again, melting points are too high. They don't really dissolve in anything. And so you need these dye molecules that we dye our blue jeans and things with. Polymers, you're familiar with polymers. I'm sure that you've had plastics that you put in the microwave and microwave something and your microwave container you didn't realize was not a microwave container and it actually melted in the microwave because plastics have low melting points and so they melt. And so you can dissolve plastics and organic molecules in lots of solvents like fingernail polish remover type stuff. And then you can print it. And so these are the things that have to be fixed. Well, the first problem is that polymers and plastics are not very good conductors, so you got to fix that problem first, right? So polyethylene, that's your saran Glad wrap, but that's not very conductive. The rubber around the cords are not very conductive. Thank God, we'd all be shocked. Glass is not conductive. Silicon's kind of conductive, but not that conductive. And of course, copper and silver and stuff are very conductive. Polymers or plastics. Plastics is just a sort of a subset of polymers, but polymers mean you have a molecule and then you have a lot of them all hooked together, and that's a polymer, okay? And so plastic's exactly the same thing. So it's just a bunch of molecules. So this is basically polyethylene, your saran wrap. It's just a bunch of carbon molecules with some hydrogens on it, and then lots of plastic bottles that we have. But these things don't conduct electricity. So discoveries that led up to this basic discovery in 1972 is a guy I know, Fred Woodall, who made this molecule. These are carbons with the bends and some hydrogens and sulfurs. And he found that if you treated this with chlorine gas, you'd make this molecule and it conducted electricity, sort of. Wasn't great. And then my Ph.D. advisor, Dwayne Cowan, showed that if you took this same molecule and put it with another molecule that was sort of similar to it, that it had metal-like conductivity. And what happens is these molecules, you don't need to know a lot, but the molecules are like pancakes, and they stack up like pancakes on top of each other. And they have something called orbitals, and orbitals is where the electrons are. And if the orbitals sort of overlap to form all these clouds, and so the electrons then have a pathway for the electrons to travel. So if I put two electrodes on the end, I can make them conduct electricity. But only after I take an electron away from them. Because most of the electrons are used for bonding. And so I've taken one electron, throw it away, and then it has an extra electron it doesn't know what to do with, and then apply electricity and I can move that one. But it has to be very stable because most organic compounds don't like an extra electron hanging around. So this was a really brilliant idea. And Dwayne Cowan would have won the Nobel Prize, but unfortunately C60 was discovered, and that led to higher temperature superconductors in organic compounds, so that blew his chance. My undergraduate advisor, I went to the University of Texas, Dallas, was John Ferraris, was the graduate student who worked on this with Dwayne Cowan, so that's the connection. And then there was a postdoc in Cowan's lab, Klaus Bechgaard. He just passed away. Klaus, one of my favorite people in the whole world. I think this is the only time he's ever wore a suit in his entire life. He usually had ripped up jeans and an old shirt and would lie down on the stage to give lectures. He's really quite a character. He's a brilliant man, and he came up with some molecules very similar to the ones I was showing you, a little different. They had selenium in them, and he made the first organic carbon-based superconductor with no resistance at low temperature called the Bechgaard salt. So I'm walking you through these discoveries because we're leading up to stuff. How do we print electronics that will change your life? Because this is the only reason you care about this. Otherwise, you care less about this stuff. And then the Nobel Prize was won by Alan McDermott, no longer with us. He has a great story. He went to this guy's lab, who was a visiting professor at Shirakawa. And Shirakawa was a visiting professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And Shirakawa invited Alan to give a lecture. And he came over, and there was a graduate student with Shirakawa. And he made a mistake in making some plastic materials. He added way too much of one chemical. You did the calculation all wrong, and he screwed it up. And instead of getting the black powder that everybody had been getting in this polyacetylene, he got this brilliant aluminum foil-looking material for the first time ever. And Alan, said, "Oh, can I have some of that?" And they said, "Sure." And he put it in his suitcase and violated all kinds of laws. And he flew it back to the United States, and then he treated it with some iodine. He oxidized it, and then he gave it to this guy, Alan Heeger, to measure the electrical conductivity, and they discovered the first plastic conductor, and then they won the Nobel Prize for that in 2000. So pretty cool story. This guy was a really interesting guy. It turns out that so people started making these conductive polymers, and they wanted to make transistors out of them. That sounds, transistors, now he's over my head already. Transistors pretty easy. Transistor's just a switch. So the light switch, you turn it off, and the lights go off, you turn it on, the lights come on. And in computers, that's all they do. They let the electricity go through, or they don't let the electricity go through. They don't let the electricity go, that's a 0, and let the electricity go through, that's a 1, and they count up the zeros and ones, and that's how they process information. So it's just a switch. There's nothing fancy about it. So they wanted to make printable transistors out of this so they could replace silicon. So that was the brilliant idea. So this guy right here, Sir Richard Friend, is I guess a great guy. He took and made this molecule, which is a conductive polymer. You probably notice it has these double lines in here. These are double bonds. And so you get these clouds of orbitals that all line up. And then what he wanted to do is he applied electricity to this because he was trying to make a transistor. He had to apply electricity to it to turn it on. And when he applied electricity to it, light came out. And he said, "Oh, I think I'll patent that." That's a very good idea. They formed a company called CDT, Cambridge Display Technologies. I think he cashed out for a couple million in 2000, and they sold the company for $250 million to Sumitomo 10 years later. And these were other people that were involved. Donald Bradley and Jeremy Burroughs were postdocs. So it's the same thing. Apply electricity, light comes on. And you can see these are all plastic materials they apply electricity to. You can make all kinds of beautiful colors. So you can imagine signage, printed TVs, your telephone of the future. And what's even more interesting is what's going to happen. We're going to have the bendable future. So we're not there yet, but this is the future. We're going to have, your cell phone might be a piece of plastic that you pull out and undo, and there it is. Or your newspaper may be just a piece of rolled up plastic that you pull out or you pull down or however you like it in your form, and then it would download on the internet the newspaper of the day just like it does with your cell phone. For the military, there'd be, plastic maps that they would very lightweight. They'd pull out in the field, open it up, and get the download the coordinates of the enemy or whatever. So this is the future, is the bendable plastic future. Throwaway electronics that are completely printed. Not there yet, but these are prototypes, real prototypes that have been made already, phones that are already basically things that you can throw away. Wouldn't it be nice to not have to spend, $500 for a telephone? Or maybe we could just print them at home on our home 3D printer. Why not, So maybe there'll be printer companies that say, hey, we don't need these Apple and Samsung characters anymore. We'll just make a 3D printer and print our own phones at home. Then we'll have to pay $500 a month for the service. But, nevertheless, I digress. All right. What's in the very near future? Well, if you can make a television, you can make lights. So if you have red, green, and blue, if you mix them together in equal proportions, you get white light. If you take blue and orange and you mix them together, you get white light. I had a color wheel on here, but I couldn't figure it out what the heck it was saying, so I took it out. But anyway, these are the colors you mix together, you get white lights. So this was, in 2016, this was the timeline for these products to market. These are actually devices made by my first startup company. And you can make white lights, tablets with white lights, and these are all the companies that are very interested in getting involved. We're not at mass production yet, so the timelines have slipped for these things, but they're very close. So all this lighting can be replaced by printed plastic lighting. And what's so cool about that is that it should be cheap enough that we can use it in so many different ways that you can't even imagine. You can make shapes, any sort of shapes that you want. Windows, you can imagine having, your beautiful view during the daytime, but then your windows become lights at nights. And these are not fake pictures. These are real pictures of prototypes where windows are being made into lights. You see through them in the day and you turn them on at night. Here's a door you can see, and you'll be able to, make your own design from your I can't forget what these doors are called. French doors or whatever, paneled doors. People will see that you'll have see-through televisions, see-through displays that could become lights or become the displays of televisions of the future. This is not far away. This is all stuff that's being made now. All the trade shows for lighting and consumer electronics, you're seeing all these prototypes. Once you see the prototypes, they're really not far from being done. 15 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I probably have the dates all wrong. I let the people here at the company tell me the truth. But 15 years ago, they had the DARPA Grand Challenges, and we saw autonomous vehicles could only drive 7 miles. And then the DARPA Urban Challenge, see if they could drive a car through the city autonomously. And now you have autonomous cars. It's not that there'll be autonomous cars. It's that you have to sell them in the right way. It will be vehicle-assisted driving, right? Because you don't want an autonomous vehicle. That's very scary. But vehicle-assisted driving, you already have that. Lane assist, smart cruise control. They're sucking you into this already. They just add all these different things: autonomous speed control, autonomous see what's in front of you control, and before you know it, you're autonomous driving. So that's where this stuff is going. So it doesn't take that long. Again, these are some of the new form factors you're going to see with lighting, completely bendable lights. You can measure painting bedrooms that are a color during the day and lights at night. It's just pretty cool stuff. Okay, let me tell you about some stuff that doesn't work. that we're hoping will work some days. Organic printable solar cells. So I have a saying in my lab, solubility is important. This means that when you make something, you ought to be able to dissolve it. So brick dust, you can't dissolve brick dust, right? And so if you can't dissolve it, it's very hard to use it to make something out of. It's hard to melt it. It's hard to, so this is important. So polyacetylene that won the Nobel Prize, wonderful molecule, but it's not soluble in anything, and it's not stable to oxygen and water in the conductive state, and you can't melt it. So it's not very good for applications. So in '85, Ron Elsenbaumer at University of Texas Arlington, Yoshino in Japan, and Fred Woodall, who was at Santa Barbara, and UC Santa Barbara, UCLA, and back to UC Santa Barbara. They made these polythiophene, basically with some alkyl groups. So this was made soluble conductive plastics, but the conductivities were too low. And so work in my lab in the 90s led to, this is called regioregular polythiophenes, and I'll tell you about this in a second. These things have very good conductivities, and once these were discovered, it led to, practical polymer transistors, practical solar cells. Solar cells are, you absorb light from the sun and you make electricity, and then light-emitting diodes. So I'm going to walk you through some of that. So this is some of my own work. You won't be tested on this. In the 90s, we made some discoveries, and then we figured out how to make this stuff very cheaply. And this material, because all these little things are pointing, these are little arms, they point out of each other's way. It allows this thing right here to be really flat. And when it's really flat, then this polymer can stack on top of itself like a pancake, and it leads to very, very high electrical conductivities. This is really interesting, at least to me. This is an actual picture of the individual molecule chains. It's taken with what's called the atomic force microscopy by one of my collaborators, Tomasz Kowalewski. And so you can actually see that these are like little nano wires that all perfectly lined up. And that leads to this really good electrical conductivity, and that's important for commercial products. And so you can get good electrical mobility, which is a measure of electricity in a transistor. And basically how this works is this molecule here is a thiophene, and you hook them all together in a particular way. And when you hook them all together, all this double bond, double single, double bond gives you a cloud of electrons, essentially, along the backbone. And then you can take some electrons out, and you can basically get charges that are all along the backbone. And if you hook it up to a battery, then you can force electricity down the chain of the polymer. So you can take this stuff, you can put it on polyethylene or something. You can coat it. It's like a paint. You can mix it with C60, which is a buckyball molecule, a round buckyball molecule. And if you mix it with this special buckyball molecule, then you can shine light on it, and you can see it generates electricity. So pretty cool. This is a plastic material that when you shine light on it, it makes electricity. I mean, that's pretty cool. That means I could put it on anything and always be generating electricity. Imagine painting on roofs, putting on anything that's like, I just marvel at roofs that are totally black. That why can't we just put all these plastics all on the roof and generate electricity at all times? So I think that's what the future will hold. And then the holy grail is to make solar windows. And so big, giant office buildings would have windows that would be coated with polythiophenes or some other material that would be clear during the day, or slightly tinted, and then would be generating lots of electricity all day long. And so that's sort of the holy grail. We're a ways from that, but that's the kind of thing that we can be thinking about in the future. Then there's all kinds of little things that you might think about. There's sensors. You have all kinds of sensors, light sensors and garden sensors, and sensors like when you get up in the night, I shouldn't tell the story. When I get up in the night, I have a lot of stairs. I live in the East Coast in Boston. And I'm very good at getting up and not turning the lights on. And so when I had my, I can't believe something. So when I had my surgery, I was taking a lot of oxycodone, and I walked down the stairs, I turned the light on, I fell down the stairs. So I'm fine. But after that, I got these little lights that come on. So, because I'm too stupid to turn the lights on, they come on by themselves now. And so they have little sensors on them, and they have to be, these have batteries, but these should be powered by these things. And then this is a really, God, come on, Rick. This is something that you'll probably see in the future, is these boxes, when you go to the grocery store, when somebody walks by them, they want the products to light up. I'm not kidding. And why do they want you to do this? They've done all this research, and it turns out that if you walk past the display and you stop, and if you spend more than, I think it's 5 or 10 seconds, then the probability of you buying that product increases by a lot. And so this is the kinds of things that they're trying to do. They already use LED lights and shine those on the candy bars, and now it's just like blinding, and nobody wants a candy bar. But, I think they're trying to figure out all kinds of ways. So this is the kind of obnoxious thing you're going to see. I mean, the great things that you'll see in the future. Also, dynamic pricing. They need to have power. It's so annoying when you go to the store and everything is like, it says $2.99, you go to the cash register and it's $4.99. And unless you're, really vigilant, they're probably ripping you off. So this dynamic pricing is something that is probably likely to come in the future. So you can do this already. This is polyethylene. This is roll-to-roll solar cells that are being printed and made into these flexible sheets that are now generating lots of displays. This is not commercial, but these are the demonstrated products. This is pretty great stuff because this is you don't care about this, but this is the solar spectrum, all these little sharp things here. And what's really great is that these polyethylenes absorb all the light, not only outdoors, but also indoors. And so you can use them in indoor lighting, and so that's one of the promises for the future. Where are we? We are here. So we can get lifetimes in the lab of 5 to 7 years. The percentages of efficiency is pretty bad. It's about 5%. Say silicon is 20, whatever, 15, 20. So amorphous silicon that you see on the road signs is probably polycrystalline silicon, maybe 15, 18. Once it's dirty, it goes down quite a bit. So we're not there yet on these sort of plastic materials. The goal is off-grid. So, all of our wires are all hooked together throughout the United States, but there are people who live in remote places that don't have wires that run electricity. So the idea would be able to absorb light from the sun, store it in a battery during the day, use it at night, so-called off-grid. All right. So the bottom line is we're not there yet, but maybe in the future we'll be there. Throwaway technology, transistors. I told you those are switches, and so you can take this material and you can turn it into a switch. The way it works is that you have an electrode, so like a gold electrode. So this is just like this is like one plug. This is the other plug, like when you're plugging something in. And you put the material here in your transistor in your phone or computer. This is silicon. And then there's another electrode down here. And so depending on how much electricity I put into here, then I either make this conductive or I don't make it conductive. If I make it conductive, electrons flow, electricity goes from here to there, and it's on. And if I don't turn this on, then this is off. So that's how essentially a transistor works. And so you can make transistors out of there. The mobility of polyethylene is about 0.3. Silicon is 1. Amorphous silicon is about 1. So we got a ways to go. But there's starting to be a number of plastic materials that have very high what's called mobilities. And so I actually expect that that's going to happen probably in the next 5 years. Here's a company, PolyIC, that's making roll-to-roll train tickets that are used in Germany using regioregular polythiophene that we invented. So it does have applications. It's called dumb technology. I call it dumb technology. I'm going to Berlin. I paid 13 euros, and I already used my ticket or I didn't use my ticket. That's all I got to remember, and this kind of technology is good for that. What about the next generation? Printed metals. I told you at the beginning that metals cannot be printed. And that's true. If I take a pure metal, it's very difficult to print a metal. I mean, who wants to take your laser printer and heat it up to 1,000 degrees and print some metal and, have to make sure your kids and grandkids are not in the room when you're doing this. So there has to be a way to do this. So there was a guy, one of my former graduate students, he was a professor in Nebraska, University of Nebraska. And then he came back to me, and we started his company, LiquidX Printed Metals. And we did it after we came up with this idea on how to print metals. And so we were motivated because all electronic devices, all printed electronic devices, are going to need an electrode. You need silver, copper, aluminum, gold, biosensors if you're measuring anything related to biological fluids for diabetes or anything like that. You have to use gold electrodes because all of their electrodes react with the blood except for gold. So you have to use gold even though it's expensive. So we were motivated by wanting to print these things. And so we needed to make printed electrodes with excellent conductivities. And so this is John Balot. John is no longer with us. He passed away, liver failure. One of my best friends of all time. He passed away when he was about 40 years old. This is when this is terrible. I love this picture because this is his mugshot. He got arrested in Nebraska for giving away fireworks to his students, some homemade fireworks, and they accused him of harboring explosives without a permit or something. And so I used to make fun of him about this mugshot. And and then I had an undergraduate, Rebecca Potash. She's now a fresh Ph.D. out of Cornell. And the two of them together with me, we came with this idea of putting shrubbery onto silver or gold and then being able to make something that if we heated it, all this stuff would go away, and then we would end up with the metal. And this works extremely well. And we formed this company called LiquidX. And so you can print something and then you heat it up, and then you get these silver or gold wires. You can see it can be very, very thin. This is on a glass slide, so you can see completely through it, but still conducts electricity. This is a mirror reflection of this measuring device. So a silver mirror. It makes these beautiful silver mirrors. You can see if we heat it up, as we heat it up, this is resistivity, but the conductivity goes way up when you heat it up. So this is really interesting. And so you convert it to silver metals that are basically the same as the bulk. I think I might have a video here. So this is I'll set this up. So this is a hot plate. So this is just a surface that's really hot, and this is a glass cover slide. It's called a glass cover slide. It's just a piece of glass, and we coated the silver stuff with the shrubbery on it, on top of it. And what's going to happen is this person's going to drop it on this hot thing, and then it's going to immediately convert to silver. That's what you're going to see. Maybe. Oh, there we go. So you put it on there, boom, it's done. You can't see the silver yet, but when they go to pick it up with the forceps, with tweezers, look for the reflection of the forceps in the mirror there. So there's a very thin silver film. It's 20 nanometers thick. Okay, a micron is the thickness of your hair. Okay, a nanometer is much thinner than that. Math is not a prerequisite for being a Harvard professor. We can also make gold. Bulk conductivity in gold is about 10 to the 7th, and we can make it almost exactly the same by making these materials. So So imagine the possibilities. So we're in a facility here today that makes robots. I honestly was so incredibly impressed with what's going on. You should be so proud of this facility. They are world leaders in robotics. There's things they do here. I was at Carnegie Mellon for 20 years, and we're known for robotics. MIT's down the street, known for robotics. We do some pretty good robotics at Harvard. But the stuff they're doing here is really groundbreaking, and really a place you should be really proud of. I was really impressed. I mean it. So let me tell you a little bit about robotics. Since we're in a robotics thing, this is almost my last slide. So you can wake up now. You can imagine if you can print electronics, what you can do with robotics of the future, right? So if you can put electronics on robotics, sensors, all kinds of stuff, this will also revolutionize robotics. One of the things that we're doing at Harvard is we're making what are called soft robots. So basically robots that are made completely out of plastic. They can be printed on a printer, 3D printed plastic robots. And we're integrating electronics into them. And so I have a project right now, we're making this inchworm thing, so the thing, can kind of squeeze up and go, move like a worm, and they need electrodes on it, but they need flexible silver electrodes, and we can do that with my technology. And so we're working on that for the future. This is a work of Professor Rob Wood. Professor Rob Wood also, if you read the popular science literature, was the one that made robo-bees. So he can make these, he can print on metal, and then they can do this sort of pop-up like a little kid's toy, and then he has these little bees that will fly around, little autonomous bees. And so you can imagine the possibilities for, flying those into those asses bad people or something and doing something to them. Being annoying or something. Sorry. And anyway, it's got a lot of possibility. Rob is a brilliant person. Person you're going to be hearing a lot about in the future is Professor Jennifer Lewis. She's making printed human tissues and doing a lot of 3D printing of electronics. And so the idea that you can make vascularized human tissues, what does that mean? If she combines the work of George Church, Professor George Church at Harvard, who has now been able to grow organs from stem cells, not embryonic stem cells, like scraping off your own skin, called pluripotent stem cells, and then turning them into other stem cells, like liver stem cells, and then putting something called transcription factors in them, and growing people's livers with nerves and blood vessels. It's just coming out. I don't know, maybe in the future you'll be able to take your own cells and grow yourself a new liver, so drink up. Just kidding. I was thinking of myself. So and if she can continue to do this, she'll be able to 3D print things like new organs. I was meeting with George the other day, trying to stay on track here. I was meeting with George the other day, and he told me that the next thing they want to do is they want to make meat, clean meat. I said, that's disgusting. And he said, yeah, you think it's disgusting? Go to the store and get some meat. And, it's got a lot of bacteria and stuff on it, but we think we can grow meat in test tubes, on plates, and grow steaks of the future. Great for vegans, don't want to kill animals and stuff. So this is a brave new world. George is also doing stuff like changing the genetic makeup of mosquitoes. This is not legal yet, but so that they can't carry malaria anymore. And so it's a lot of really cool things going on. George Church is a brilliant guy and doing lots of cool stuff, and he's going to work with Jennifer Lewis, and she's doing a lot of cool printing. And then I saw a pretty amazing exosuit here. This may be not even as good as what they're doing here, but Connor Walsh is working with Rewalk making these, but I see he doesn't have the ankle support like they do here, so I don't know. I have to go back and talk to Connor about that. But he's made these Iron Man suits to help people be physically stronger Those are basically, Velcroed things that you put on that are run by electronics, and so now I can pick up, 200, 300 pounds or something like that, which would be interesting. And helping stroke victims and physically challenged folks like that. So imagine the sort of electronics I talked today about with displays and cameras and sensors and stuff that we put on robots. So the future is really interesting to think about in the future. So I hope I convinced you printed electronics has already changed your life. Will continue to do so. And I hope my political pitch will be, so I hope you'll continue to support investments in science and technology in the future, because they do make a difference. They're important for technological competitiveness of our country. It's a patriotic thing to do. I'm sorry if that is political, but hey, I'm a scientist. I'm the head of research at Harvard. I have a job to do, so I'm doing a job. This is not free. Supported by the NSF and the Air Force, Carnegie Mellon, where I was before, and now Harvard provide generous support of my work. And I don't do anything. It's really the people in my lab. And so I want to take I don't want to hold you too long, but Tomasz Kowalewski, when I was the Dean of Science and Vice President for Research at CMU, really helped my lab to stay afloat. We had all joint students together, and he's a brilliant guy. And I've had amazing postdocs, Delia Haynes, Mihaela, Stefan, who's a professor at University of Texas at Dallas, postdoc Malika Jeffrey-Sell, who was a professor at Iowa State, who led to me coming here, thanks to you, and now at BU, postdoc Ataro Asaku, who's a professor at Hiroshima University, and then brilliant graduate students, Lei Zai, who's at University of Central Florida here in the Nanoscience Center, and postdoc Toby Nelson, who's at Oklahoma State, and great graduate students, Junying Yu, who's in industry, Courtney Ballet works at PPG, Jessica Cooper, who's at FDA, postdoc Genevieve Solvay, who's at Case Western Reserve, brilliant undergraduates, so happy, Rebecca Potash, Stephanie Sidlick, who went to MIT and is now a professor at Carnegie Mellon. She took my position when I left to go to Harvard. She actually has my lab. And Dr. Swati Varshney went to MIT, who now, as she says, blows stuff up for the government to make sure that the armor works. So, but anyway, these are great people, and they've done all the work and brought all the great, and Anna Javier as well. And all of you have been so generous. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the lecture. There we have some questions. This young lady here.
When you were talking about light and the colors of light, I'm an interior designer, and we have really been screwed by what's been going on with light, because people, the color spectrum of light that people grow up with, the colors we're selected with, are an off-white, more to the yellow spectrum. The stuff that's going on now is so white. I have clients who happen to be physicians who come in where I do have the LED lights and say, please, for God's sake, turn them off. We are living with those all day long. We can't stand it. Please put on your incandescents. What are you going to ever get back to the color of incandescence for the average person?
It's a great question. Really, really good question. So I am an anti-LED person for exactly the reasons that you're talking about. The light is really bright and really harsh and point light, and so it requires a lot of energy and lots of them to do that. The light I'm talking about here that's going to be made in the future, you know this probably better than I do, but they're a perfect white light, and it's the mixture of the different colors, and so it's a color spectrum, as you know well, and you move, and some are more green, some are more blue, and so what's good about the organic stuff is we think we'll be able to tune it to something that's more like a liking to your eye. I don't think LED is going to be here for very long because of that exact reason. I'm blinded by the cars. I'm blinded by these lights. Fluorescent light is terrible because it's this sort of yucky yellow-green. Incandescent is great because of the color spectrum, and everybody's trying to get to that, but it's a tough problem.
Because even your incandescent, those are blue whites, even though they say that they're
Yes,
not.
yes.
It affects the colors. You have a color scheme. You painted your home, and then you come in with LEDs.
Oh, I can agree with you more. Yes, sir. I think I had this gentleman right here next, and then you'll be next. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Pass it over to that guy down there. I think his hand went up first.
Thank you very much. What a great lecture.
Thank you.
The human brain, the nervous tissue, is the most complicated and delicate tissue we know about. Did I hear you say we're on the verge of synthetic nerves making nerve tissue?
Yeah, that's no. There's a lot of research going on in this area, and actually these conductive plastics, they've made artificial nerves out of the conductive plastics in the past, but the actual, right now where we are in that is we're trying to understand the wiring of the nervous system. And so people at Harvard, for example, are using imaging and computer science to understand the wiring of the nerves first. We don't yet have a material that will work. These conductive polymers are the closest thing that we've seen to artificial nerves, but we're pretty far from something like that. Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to thank you for one of the best lectures I've heard out of many wonderful lectures here.
Thank you.
My question deals with the plastic it put on roof and generate electricity. Will it last? How's it hold up in the weather?
Yeah, probably not that great. But the idea would be is that maybe it would last 5 years. But it's basically a roll-out plastic that, you know, anybody could just go up and just clip on and replace it in that way. Now, if it's painted on, that's going to have to be something that has a lifetime longer than 10 years or whatever people are willing to sort of put up with, right? 20 roofs are 20 years, so you have to, you know, sort of think in 20 years. But if it's a plastic rollout thing, it might be something that would work. And then I don't know where we are. Yes, sir. Raise your hand if just so I can know where to go next. Okay.
Actually, I have two questions. One, it's my understanding that most modern cell phones already have oligo screens to them. Is that correct?
That's correct. Okay. Samsung Galaxy were the first phones to have OLED screen. It was called AMOLED, active matrix organic light emitting diode. Yes, sir.
And the second question has to do with your 3D printing when you were talking about stem cells and making more complex organs like the liver. And it would seem like it would be more simplistic to make artificial skin for like burn victims and that. Is that also being studied?
Oh man, that's a hard question. So, yeah, actually, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm going to take a wild guess. I think skin is they're doing a lot of work in skin now, but to get active skin is really complicated. And so they can definitely make something to sort of patch up burn victims, but not skin that you can actually feel and has those properties. And I know that's not what you meant, but I'm just sort of just answering that question. But that's a great question. Okay, I thought I saw something back over there.
Hey, so
Hey.
the like bane of the planet right now, right, is plastics. Like our oceans filling up with plastics. So what happens when we find the printable plastic technologies and whatnot, and then we move on? What happens to, is that a concern? Because I know we want it to stand up to the weather and everything, but then we've just got more buildup of plastics on the Earth.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, wow. Well, I think, I don't want to sound argumentative or anything. It's a good point. It's a very good point. But hopefully what we're replacing them with, we're actually improving to some degree. So the polyethylene solar cells are completely green and completely non-toxic and can be recycled. So that's positive, but that doesn't mean that what the product will come out with won't be somewhat bad. But the whole point of this is to try to make it more green. If we look at televisions, before you were born, they had these big giant televisions that had cathode ray tubes in them, and they had all kinds of nasty, terrible metals in there that poison you. And so we just throw them out on the sidewalk and, throw them in the creek or whatever when I was a kid. Who cares, right? So when we went to LCD televisions, which are liquid crystal display televisions, those are less toxic. So we're actually improving, and I think OLED is even less toxic than those TV. And also they use less energy. I mean, liquid crystal displays are basically, they put a giant light back here, and then there's molecules that block the light, or they let the light through, and then they just have a color filter to make the colors. So it's really inefficient.
Time for one more question.
Who was up first? Two more questions.
So I was kind of interested when you were showing us your nanometer-sized silver lining on glass. The fact that you have to heat the plastic in order to get it to remove and leave the silver lining behind, what are the, from a chemistry standpoint, what are the byproducts of that heating?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, you were super interested is what you meant to say, not you're kind of interested. You say you're kind of interested, but what you meant to say was you're ecstatic about that possibility. That's a great question. So there are different kinds of plastics that have different melting points. So polyethylene has like a melting point of 120 degrees C or whatever. But polycarbonate has a much higher, plexiglass, like in a windshield or something, much higher temperature. And so right now we can only print on the things that have a little bit higher temperatures, and we're moving to those cheaper plastics. When you heat them up, most of the stuff that's coming off are vinegar, so that's not bad. And then the other stuff that comes off is basically, when you have fish and you've left it out overnight, the fresh fish, and then it kind of smells kind of bad. It's basically compounds like that. Amines, those are amines, and so most of those things they're not really toxic. We design them that way on purpose to give off basically things that are not harmful at all, very common. It's not things that are going to be bad for you. Will you take one more question? You're going to allow me? I think there was one person back there, and then I'll stop taking over the.
I actually went to Best Buy the other day, and I saw QLED, quantum dot LED, and I was wondering if you could explain the difference between quantum dot and an organo.
Yes, that will be the next 30 minutes of the lecture time. No, that's a great question. So the molecules in the OLED television for LG and Sony are very similar to these iridium compounds that you saw that get evaporated onto them. Q-dot television are called quantum dot. It's called quantum dots. And quantum dots are basically what are called nanocrystalline semiconductors. And so they're just clusters of molecules. And so you take like cadmium selenide is what it's called. So it's a cadmium and selenium, both really toxic, by the way. And if you have 10 molecules, then you get a certain color that might be green. And then if you put a few more molecules around it, then you might get orange. And you put more molecules around it, you get red. And then you get more molecules around it, and you get purple. And so the size of the molecule dictates what color that you get. And so that's what they're doing. They're making different quantum dots and then isolating them in wells on top of each other. And then they change however much electricity they put in determines how much of which color comes on. So it's a different technology. Again, not printed, but very interesting technology indeed. Nanocrystalline semiconductors, yeah. Great question.
Let's thank our speaker.
Yeah.